History is a funny word. Not as funny as
Wait, no,
kippers.
I said that last time. You can't do that.
So what? I wasn't there.
You still can't say that.
Who are you, the Emperor of no pun? Empress of no pun included? I can do the joke anyway. History is a funny word.
As the Empress of no pun included, there's going to be a few changes around here.
Like what?
Like, you're not going to
That's
be
my
needing
wallet.
this anymore. We'll use the currency that I want to use instead.
It's just Star Wars Monopoly money.
And another thing, celery will always be served with custard in this.
No!
That's disgusting. One more thing as well. Your hair will always be cut to resemble David Spade.
Elaine, that's horrible. Can I at least read my role-playing games?
Yeah, about that.
History is a funny word. Mostly because it's not really funny, it's very bland. And it doesn't have a lot of background to it. Do you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't have a lot of substance on its own. It's very neutral, it's very blah, it's very much like wool or syntax. Words that don't really have anything tangible behind it when you say them. But there is a lot of tangible things in history, we know that. We know how brutal, harsh and horrible history can be. Take, for example, the Qin dynasty, which is a dynasty that ruled China directly after ZhanGuo, or the Warring States period. Now, I'm not an expert on history, especially ancient Chinese history, I'm not going to pretend that. But what I do know is that the Qin dynasty only lasted 15 years, but is exemplified by its just utter lack of humanity, brutality. You know, it's full of horrible things that were done to people that shouldn't have been done. And the ramifications of the Qin dynasty last to this very day and age. This very place, Harpenden, England, which is bizarre, I know, but it's how it works. Anyway, ZhanGuo, the board game, is about this period, is about the unified ancient China. And what the emperor wanted to do, he wanted to establish a common currency, writing, and most importantly laws. And the reason the laws are important is because the Qin dynasty followed this philosophy called legalization. And what that meant is that basically your rights as a human being were mostly removed, and you had to follow a very strict set of laws. And you were expected not only to uphold those laws, but to even report your neighbor if they did something that contradicted them, and if you didn't, your head would be chopped off, which isn't very good, so you probably would have reported your neighbor. And yeah, so very, very harsh. Actually, one other thing, it was also exemplified by the notion that, you know, common people shouldn't be educated, so all books were burned, and if you didn't submit your books for burning, if you were a scholar, you would be buried alive, as an example. So yeah, this is the background of this board game. And unsurprisingly, for a board game, it takes a very neutral approach, a very abstract approach, and that's completely fine. But once you play this game, you experience some very strange emotions because, for example, you, as an action, you can hire these workers, and you think, oh, well, it's just workers. Actually, they're not, because the value of a common person in ancient China, apparently during the Qin dynasty, was nothing. And so, unless you were somehow very, very useful and performed a useful task. So if you couldn't, for some reason, then you became a slave and were sent off to build the Great Wall of China or one of the many other palaces.
ZhanGuo is both worker placement and also a build your own engine game. At the beginning of the round you get 6 cards, 2 each, from the writing deck, the currency deck and the law deck. That's the one that they chop your head off if you do the wrong thing. And there are 2 different things that you can do with these cards. You can either place them on your own player board, thereby building up your own bonuses, or you can put them here. And that's the core action. That will allow you to do one of these 6 things. And that's where the kind of worker placement element comes into it. If you put them on your own player board, and that's the build your own engine bit of it, you will get one of these unification markers. So if I play a white card, I will get a white unification marker. And so everyone is very happy and fine, and they're feeling unified. But then if I play another one in the same region, so I've played a brown one here, I will get 2 unification markers because I've played a second card. But now they're feeling a bit unrestful, a bit discontented because, I've changed their laws and I've changed their writing and they're feeling a bit miffed. So I will also have to take one of these black beads, which is an unrest token.
I'm always a little bit disappointed when I hear that there's another worker placement game coming out. I mean, do we really need another Kalis or another Russian Railroads? But then, obviously, I end up playing them and I am really, really impressed. And ZhanGuo is not an exception because the actual worker placement mechanic is quite hidden. It's not apparent this is a worker placement game, but it is. And the way you place workers in ZhanGuo is, as Elaine mentioned, you play one of these cards as a court action and you can do one of the 6 things. Now, what does that actually do? So let's say, for example, I want to install a governor in one of my regions. Now, why would I want to do that? Well, because Region 2 has a lot of unrest. And to remove that unrest, we're gonna take the install governor action and remove these 3 cubes. They are officials and they have 3 different colors. And then we get to just remove the unrest. It's gone. Now think about that for a little bit. And we install a governor. So this little dude goes on Region 2. And not only that, we get a bonus. For example, what we can do is we can put him here and then get full victory points. Nice and easy. Now, the real meat and potatoes part, however, of this is these little numbers tied to these cards. Now, you'll see that writing cards have numbers between 1 to 40, currency cards will have numbers between 41 and 80, and law cards will have numbers between 81 and 120. Now, what does that really mean? Well, some of the actions in the court action section require you to play a card with a higher number. Some of them require you to play a card with a lower number. Now, you don't have to play that specific card, but if you do, you will get bonuses. And the bonuses, and this is beautiful, it all ties back into the build your own engine part. The bonuses are determined by the bonus cards that you have played in your region. So for example, if I was to play that card and take the, which is a lower number as you'll notice, take the install governor's action, then each card with an install governor action bonus in my player board area will trigger and I'll get an extra thing. So like here, I'll not just do all these things. I won't just remove unrest in region 2, but I'll also get an extra unification marker, which feels really, really clever. You feel very, very smart when you do that.
ZhanGuo is certainly a clever game, far too clever to explain to any monkey. And the reason it feels clever is because at the beginning of the game you won't feel like you're doing a great deal. You'll be recruiting officials and you'll be hiring workers and you'll be playing your cards, but it won't feel like you're doing that much. But as the game progresses, you will suddenly come to realise that you've only got a certain amount of actions to fulfil all the victory conditions that you want to do, all the things you want to do in the game. For example, when you build a wall, and that might be troublesome in itself because you need workers to build your walls, and the better you want your wall, the more workers you need. So if you want to build kind of a naff rubbish wall that's, not very good, you only need one worker to knock it up for you. But if you want a stellar wall that's going to keep anything out, then you need 3 workers, and they all have to come from different regions. And when you build your wall, and you'll notice there are 3 different regions you can build your wall in, and that's not to be confused with the other regions, the normal regions where everything else happens in the game. Don't forget that. When you build your wall, depending on how well you've built it, how well your workers have built it, you'll get a certain number of victory points if you fulfill this condition at the end of the game. But that's not all. There is also, if you manage to fulfill the victory conditions on here, so if you build your wall in the right coloured areas, you will manage to get even more victory points at the end of the game.
And now that the Empress of No Pun Included has been slain by a monkey, we can actually talk about the things I like about ZhanGuo. The number one thing I really like about this game is that you will always watch what your opponent is doing, which is great. Not many heroes do that. In some games you'll just be minding your own player board, but here everything your opponent does matters, and the number one thing you'll be looking at is their hand, and specifically with what cards, what type of cards they've got left. And you'll be planning your actions based around that, because the way the game starts, you'll just be playing cards into your player board. You'll be tucking them in very nicely and it's all great. And then you'll start to take actions and you'll start to think, oh, okay, I have all these workers, I have all these officials, I could install a governor, I could build a palace, I could build a wall. But you usually end up not doing that, which is so bizarre. But the reason you don't is, first of all, you're watching your opponent's hand and is going, do they have a lot of writing cards? That means they can't play high numbers. So you want to kind of base your strategy around that. And on top of that, a lot of actions reward you more for being taken later in the game. For example, building a palace. When you do build a palace, you'll score victory points equal to the number of cards you have tucked under your player board. So again, if it's early game, you won't score a lot. You'll score about 5 or 6, but if it's late game, you're more likely to score about 10 or 12, or maybe even 15. As Elaine mentioned, you're going to be scoring victory points at the end of the game for building things in specific places, and they're based on these two separate sections. So the more you fulfill requests in one section, the more victory points you're going to get at the end of the game. So you want to watch what your opponent is doing and not start building too early. You want to see what their strategy is. So you can, for example, build in a different location, or maybe you want to claim it early. Maybe you want to be the guy that says, hey, I'm going to take these, right? And then either you're competing with me or you're left with these, which are probably worse. So there's a lot of little details like that in ZhanGuo that you have to always pay attention to. I love that. I think that's great.
ZhanGuo is not as complicated as it first seems because everything is so clear and so well laid out, including the rulebook, which even has a bit of background, which it really does give you more in-depth knowledge of the game. And you don't feel like there's a kind of treacle of forest of bits and cards and things to wade through, so much so that you forget what you're going to do on your next turn because you can't keep track of everything. It's just so well done. And the player board, when you play it through the first time, it will feel like a learning experience, which is fine because the Emperor approves of that. But one side is generic. For every player it's the same, but the other side has an added ability. When you play it, you will first think, wow, that's brilliant, that will make the game easier, but actually we found that it makes the game a bit more tricky because you're trying to think ahead more, you're trying to think, how will this work strategically for me? It also reduces the number of black cubes you can put on the board, which does make the game harder as well, because if you look on here, if you end up with an unrest token here, you lose the ability to put down palaces in that region. And if you put another unrest cube on, if you move the unrest cube further up, then you cannot use any of the abilities on the cards that you have in that region either, in addition to not being able to place palaces. The graphics add to the theme of the game as well. Look at this courtier, not courtesan as I first said, and Efka had to correct me quite sternly. Look at this courtier here. She's clearly quite regal. She's got lovely jewellery, lovely hair, lovely clothes. And then compare that to one of the workers, generic, just a hammer, faceless and homogenised, and that for us elevates the theme of the game.
Now, one last thing that's cool about ZhanGuo is these unification markers. And as we mentioned, you get them for playing cards into your player board. But what they're really useful for is that at the end of each round, you get bonuses for having them. And the person that gets the bonus is the person with most of them. And however, you don't necessarily have to take the bonus. And if you don't, then the bonus is offered to the next person down the line. However, if you do take it, you have to give up all of your unification markers, which can be quite a lot. And
But it is worth maybe getting 1 or 2 just so that you can try and get those bonuses. It's not worth squirreling them up because the victory points that you get at the end of the game for them are not as good as the rewards you get through the game.
That's very true. Now, criticisms.
The only one that I really have is that I sometimes confused grey with white. So only on the board, the cubes clear as, but on the board. So when I was trying to get officials of one colour maybe, I was thinking it was one colour, it was just so confusing for me at points. So that kind of messed it up a little bit for me sometimes.
Not for me, but I think it depends on how colourblind you are. My actual criticism is that some of the rules are just a little bit fiddly. Not in a way that really detracts from the game, but there are a few of them. And that's it. That's all we have. And actually we had to think hard to
bring up any criticisms, because I didn't find that either, so...
Yeah, we really enjoyed the game. We really, really like it. And actually, we would, if we were to say buy, play, or stay away right now, we would definitely say buy. But here's the other thing. This game, it's a little bit ironic that we're reviewing it right after Imperial Settlers, because it's unfair to compare them at all in any way whatsoever.
Different.
They're very different. But at the core of them, there is something very similar, as in you have cards and you can use them in different ways, and you can either, you know, build your own engine kind of thing, or use cards in a different fashion. And I think that there's a little bit of a parallel there between these two games. However, ZhanGuo is much more complicated than Imperial Settlers.
It's that meaty game that you were looking for, yeah.
Pretty much, yeah. If you enjoy Imperial Settlers and you want a meatier version of that...
There it is, ZhanGuo.
Kind of.
Kind of.
Kind of.
But not really.
But almost. Anywho, we really like ZhanGuo and we couldn't recommend it enough. It's not Terra Mystica, don't get me wrong. It's not that level of greatness, but it is a really, really good game. And eventually, once you wrap your head around it and around all the possible victory conditions, oh my god, it just blows you away. It's really good. It's really good. So probably buy ZhanGuo. Hello, I'm Maggie, Empress of No Pun Included, Breaker of Worlds, Bane of the Coal Miners. Now, as you can see, Elaine and Epka left all this mess for me to clean up. Now, please help poor old Maggie out by subscribing to the No Pun Included YouTube channel, and also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. I don't know how it's going to help Maggie, but I've not been one for logic.